Well, here we go again, another year. Who's here for the first time or didn't join us last year, or this is your first year? Maybe you're here last week. Help me out. Raise them high. I can't see very well. Wow. Okay. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Vital Men. For those of you who were last week, you know that you are blessed with very gifted speakers once a month. Then you get me, and I'm the real guy. I'm the guy that maybe and hopefully you can relate to. And then you get sandwiched on the other end, and you typically are going to get Mike at the tail end of the month. So you get kind of that Oreo cookie thing. But let me tell you about me, because I know a lot of you are familiar faces. Some of you I've known at least as a familiar face for a long time. There's a reason why I'm going to tell you this. Not that I want to bore you with my history, but I just want to tell you that I am like you. Born and raised here in Pella. I'm married. I got 3 kids. My daughter's in college. Decided she wanted to get married, so I'm busy struggling trying to figure out how to pay for that. Got 2 boys in high school. That's an up and down and all over the place kind of an adventure, mostly up and all kinds of fun stuff there. My wife right now, she is literally walking with her dad as he's knocking at death's door. She moved them into assisted nursing care yesterday. Her mom's got Alzheimer's and can't remember 20 minutes ago, sometimes 2 minutes ago, what conversation we just had. And so the 3 of us boys have been batching it. I owned a photography studio for 22, 23 years. I think I did that full time. Got out of that about the time computers and digital stuff came, because I said, if I got to learn something new, I'm going to learn something new. Sold insurance for 2 years, found out that, you know what, that's pretty regulated, and they don't like a guy that just likes to fly all over the place. So I said, I better move out of that. Then I went and worked for a local graphic arts company. I was their marketing guy, sales guy. Anybody hear of the Earth Park? You know, the one that was supposed to be coming? Well, guess what? We were short of having signatures. We were going to be the marketing arm for that. That didn't happen. So, I started selling pens and pencils and tablets and all that other stuff that businesses give away for freebie junk stuff. And that was on the road, and so I decided I didn't want to do that. So here's kind of the way my mind operates. I said, okay, what could I do that I don't work very hard? Now, you got to remember, this is my same thought process how I started a photography studio. What do I got to do that I don't work very hard, that I could probably do till I'm 70-some years old, because I really haven't saved much money for a retirement? Chuck Vanderwall. By golly, I don't know squat about cars. I drive an old junker, still do. And my daughter and son share an even worse car than that. So I'm going, Chuck, guess what? At that time, some of you maybe know Stan Vrome. He had been a salesman at Ulrich's for 40-plus years. He had unfortunately just passed away with cancer. I walked in and said, Chuck, Steve Akers works here. He's from Pella, but he's not Dutch. None of your other salespeople are Dutch. You need me. I started on Monday. That's kind of how, and we figured out the rest as we go. Now, I've been there just over 4 years. So I say all that because when I get to here, I'm hoping I can be as real as what real can be. And you're going to see, some of you are going to be like my wife. You're going to be incredibly frustrated with the way my mind and the way my mouth work together. Because sometimes I'm about 7 steps ahead, and I'm just going to assume that most of the time you can finish my thought, even though I may not say it. So I'm going to move on to the next thing on occasion. That's just the way I operate. I want to keep moving, and I'm jumping ahead of myself more often than not. So if you get stuck on what I was trying to say, that's why we got group discussions later. You can kind of help each other out and kind of work through where I was at. So that all said, here's where we are. Mike comes to me in July and said, here's what our theme for September is going to be. Well, let me tell you, I saw the movie The Avengers. You kind of know that this theme is from that movie, right? Okay, I saw that in the drive-in, slept through half of it. So I'm going, oh, crud. This is a pretty wide open. So I want to give you the thought process of, I'm going, okay, Avengers, superheroes. Okay, I'm going to do a talk on, so if you don't like what I'm saying, maybe you can have table discussion about this thought. All right? So if you don't like the rest of the night, go around this thought. I'm going, okay, is my life and my faith more like the movie It's a Wonderful Life, or is it like the action-packed Avengers movie? And I didn't know where else to go other than that great thought right there. But I thought that'd be a pretty good place to start for a sermon. But I didn't go down that road. But if that hits close to home, because I think that's maybe where some of us are at. Our life is kind of the boring. We all know the lines to every Andy Griffith show. It's a Wonderful Life. We've seen it. We've done it. It doesn't thrill us anymore. But maybe we need to figure out how to make our faith walk a little more like the Avengers. So I'm going all over the place. Here's ultimately what I kind of came to. You got the whole superheroes and strength, and they got all their strengths, and obviously we could go down because these guys all kind of have their past and their weaknesses, and those are all things. And I'm sitting there thinking, my strength really comes when I'm willing to be weak. I'm going, God, I hope there's something in the Bible that says something like that. And I think you're going to run with me, and I think we're going to get to that point before the night's over. So that's where we're going. As men, I want you, we talk about strength, and I'm not downgrading all that, but I want you to maybe consider what it's going to look like to actually find your strength and being willing to admit your weakness. So, that movie clip. I said, Steve, let's find something. For those of you who are not familiar with that, that's from the movie Unbreakable. And kind of the premise of, and it's been a long time since I've actually watched the whole thing, but my understanding of the premise, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, toward the beginning of the movie, there's like this major train wreck of sorts, and the character played by Bruce Willis is like the only one that walks away. I think everybody else is killed. He walks away without a bruise, without a scratch, without a bloody nose, without nothing. And then in walks this other character played by Samuel L. Jackson, and he's kind of known as Mr. Glass because he's got this DNA thing where his bones break. And so throughout the whole movie, and part of that clip that we were talking about is Samuel L. Jackson is trying to convince him, you've got a gift. You've got something that you cannot keep to yourself. And so that's a little bit of where we're going to. We've been given a gift, guys, and we've got to figure out we cannot keep that to ourselves. So kind of hang on to that little overriding thought of sorts. But here is my thought as I kind of thought, okay, how do we kind of launch into this? Here's the one question, one of the many questions I had. We're all quite breakable, susceptible to disease, accident, injury, violence, germs, disaster, all that stuff. I've shared a little bit about what my family's walking through, and I'm sure every one of us have something like that. So that can obviously lead to all sorts of questions. And why did this happen? Why God? Why the timing of this? What does this mean? What am I supposed to take away from this? Maybe even a deeper, bigger question, who's behind this? Is God orchestrating this, or is this the devil? Maybe you can kind of go into some of those sort of thought processes. I've got some of my personal opinions as to where that's going. Here's what I think you're going to find about my teaching. I'm going to leave a lot of things open-ended. As the good book says, anybody hear of the Bereans? There's a short little passage. Paul talks about the Bereans. You know why he loved the Bereans? Because they were willing to go to the Word and test and check what Paul had taught. So you're looking at a car salesman, a guy who used to be a basketball coach. Take what I'm saying as a starting point, but I challenge you to go to the Word yourself. Check it out and come to a decision that you can be good with. So here's my question. How am I supposed to reach out to a hurting world when I'm doing all I can to hold my own world together? If you could pull up the first slide to get us going here, Steve. Let's kind of jump. So here's kind of the theme. God uses cracked pots. And more importantly, God can use all kinds of people. It's really kind of interesting because that's what I love about this group. There is so much diversity here. And by the end of the night, I think hopefully you're going to be as fired up about as I am about this, because I look at where we can go, what we can touch, how we can affect our region, our area. God uses all kinds of people. So let's go to the next slide. And it's going to bring us to, we're going to talk about Gideon and the power of weakness. That's going to be a big part of where we're going tonight, and we're going to walk through that. So make sure you have a Bible. If you don't, there are more back at the back corner, I believe, so make sure you got a Bible. But let's go, and I want you to read with me kind of one of the overarching themes. Let's go to 2 Corinthians 4. 2 Corinthians 4, verses 6 and 7. I'll read it for us here. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. Here we go, verse 7. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. So let's talk about jars of clay for a second. I've got lots of props. I got things, hopefully, that will kind of make some sense. We may need a few more house lights as we get rolling so we can make sure everything. But let's talk about, literally, the jars of clay that they were talking about is a reference to my humanity. All of our humanity is like an empty clay jar. And the word that they use in Scripture is literally means earthenware. Plain, ordinary, run-of-the-mill, nothing special. Quite frankly, kind of looks like this group. No offense intended. I throw myself into that same mix as far as that goes. No superstars, and we're all kind of just trudging through life and seeking to try to do God's will, and we're doing what we can. Okay, here's my Pastor Richard moment. Are you ready? I really had to think about this one. Okay, turn to the brother next to you, and say, I'm clay, but that's okay. Ready? Turn. I'm clay, but that's okay. Preach it, brother. Okay, he's way more effective with that style than I am, but I thought we got to have a little bit. For those of you who missed last week, don't miss Pastor Richard again. So, we're all clay, but that's okay. Hang on to that thought. So let's go to the next slide for me, Steve. Here's what you need to know. God didn't create me, you, any of us to be a decoration. We're made to contain something valuable, and we're not to be an object that's just admired. I got 3 different kinds of pots up here. First one. Well, I had to search for these. I think my daughter made this in art class. But the idea of it is this. It's been fired, it's been painted, it's been glazed, it's been all that stuff. So in and of itself, this kind of a pot is not what we're called to be. Because in and of itself, it sits just like that on the shelf by our fireplace. Granted, not award-winning art, but it can stand by itself. Your attention is on the pot. Moving to pot number 2. I hope my mother doesn't miss her flower. I stole it. But you will notice that you don't really notice the pot. What you are intended to notice, the purpose of the pot, is to be the holder of something. Boy, that was a good Pastor Richard moment. About spit all over you. Is to highlight and to hold the thing that you're featuring. So that's what's happening here. That's where we're going with our lives. The third pot, I got a couple of different versions. Let's see, and we're not going to spend much time on this. It's cracked, it's chipped. In fact, you can tell what kind of a fix-it guy I am. It's held together by duct tape. Is that some of our lives? I thought that was about as good a word picture as I could create for where I'm at most days. And most of, and it's like some days I'm like this, and this one's almost half shot, but it's hanging on by a thread. We're going to come back to just how God uses these. Because that's where the fun comes. But here's the point I want you to remember. Get your pens out. This is one thing I am going to do. I'm going to ask you. You'll never, ever, ever, most of you will never, ever, ever read these notes again, but I want you to write some notes. Do it, because you know what? I was a communications major, and the one thing I learned in 4 years at Central College, if you take notes, you're going to remember, and you won't have to reread them. You're just going to remember more if you take notes. Okay, I didn't learn that at Central College. You want to tell? Here's me. 4 years, double major, 1 5-subject notebook, all 4 years. Use the same one. So do not practice what I preached back in the early 80s. Write some things down for yourself. So here's what we go. First thing I want you to write down. You're going to go home and you're going to tell your wife, you're going to tell your loved one, you're going to tell your sister, you're going to tell anybody that cares, because they need to hear this same story. God did not create you and me to sit around and look nice. Instead, God created us, plain as we may appear, to be containers of something very valuable. You don't have to write all that. Summarize that. Summarize that. We weren't created just to be pretty boys. Most of us, we don't have to worry about that, but that's the idea. There's a great story. Arvin's going to help me out as we kind of roll through this. There's a great story. I said we were going to talk about the story of Gideon. So grab your Bibles, and we're going to run to Judges 7. Help each other out. Those of you who maybe aren't familiar, that's Old Testament. That's back toward the front. Maybe about 5, 6, 7 chapters in, or books into the Bible. Judges 7. If anybody's got one of those Bibles that's sitting around, if you got a page number, that may help us out if you want to shout it out. 240. 240 in the Old Testament, toward the front. Let's go to the next slide for me. Okay, we're going to talk about doing the Gideon. I said to my son, son, give me the best cool dance of what the kids are doing now, because we're going to do that. And he goes, Dad, don't even try. I said, you are so far beyond cool. That's why Mike always makes me do Blues Brothers, because I can act like an idiot and nobody ever knows the difference. So what's the Gideon? The Gideon this is where God takes weak people and difficult situations and turns them around for His glory. So hang on to that thought. That's the Gideon. So here's what's kind of interesting to start the whole story off, to set the stage. We've kind of read through this before. Many of you are maybe sort of familiar, but we're going to kind of go a few verses at a time through the story to point out a few things. Here's kind of the interesting thing. When it came time to deliver Israel from the Midian, God went to the smallest tribe. He went to the least family in that tribe. And then He went to the youngest member of that family. And that's where we find our man Gideon. Isn't God interesting how He works? Just about the time you think common sense would maybe step forward, God turns things upside down. I mean, you can read any parable you want. That's kind of the way God operates. So don't be surprised when some of that stuff starts happening. I mean, that's the beauty and the wonder of a faith walk. Is God loves throwing curveballs at all of us. It's just rather whether we're going to be watching for Him. So let's go to the next slide for me. Can you do that? So we're going to start. Let the battle begin. Arvin, would you do me the favor of reading those first 2 verses from Judges 7?
Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all his men camped at the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Morah. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men for me to deliver Midian into their hands, in order that Israel may not boast against me that her own strength has saved her."
So here we go, recapping. Gideon rounded up all the men he could find, and they were still way short on numbers. From what I understand from reading, that's about 32,000 men stepped up to the plate for Israel, and we were going to be going up against 135,000 Midian soldiers. That's about, every man has to take out about 4. And in the kind of combat that they did, those odds were not good. So can you imagine the surprise of Gideon and anybody else that maybe was listening when the Lord said, "You've got too many men." Let's go to the next one for me. Let's go to... we didn't just read that, did we? Let's read that one. 2 and 3.
Read 2. We'll keep on to 3.
Yeah, just keep going here.
Announce now to the people, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained.
God's decided to make a weak Israel even weaker. So here's some thoughts that maybe aren't on your paper. You might want to jot these down for further discussion, table leaders. Maybe you'll get into this if discussion comes to a slow. Why does He allow times of weakness and or overwhelming odds? I'll give you the answer, but maybe you can still discuss it. We are more reliant on Him, and He can show us more of Himself. Because here's what's interesting, and we all know this. The human heart loves to claim credit for any victory or achievement. So God wanted to make sure that it wasn't about Israel. It wasn't about their fighting abilities. It wasn't about the numbers. It was about Him creating a miracle and making something unbelievable happen. So, again, here's the question we can ask from way back when, but I'm asking you to maybe put some of these into your own personal life. If God had allowed Israel to defeat Midian with only 1/4 of the Midian's men, who would have gotten the credit? Let's go to the next slide. Would you be one of the 300? Arvin, continue reading again. We maybe can
But the Lord said to Gideon, "There are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will sift them for you there. If I say, 'This one shall go with you,' he shall go. But if I say, 'This one shall not go with you,' he shall not go." So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, "Separate those who lap the water with their tongues like a dog from those who kneel down to drink." 300 men lapped with their hands to their mouths. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the other men go, each to his own place." So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites to their tents, but kept the 300, who took over the provisions and trumpets of the others. Now the camp of Midian lay below him in the valley.
Okay, recapping, we read in the previous verse there were those who were fearful, they were allowed to go. 22,000 of them said, "I'm out of here." That was part of a law from way back with Moses that gave them an out. So then out of the 10,000 remaining, they're commanded to go down. 9,700 of them bent down and drank water straight from the water, while 300 of them stood and used their hands to bring water to their mouth. Next slide for me. So God was only interested in the smaller group that was more watchful. It was interesting just reading some of the Bible commentaries. Here's the question. None of these men knew that there was a test going on. Likewise, God tests us, looking for hearts that are truly His. Those tests come in ordinary events in our daily lives, often without our knowing. I found that kind of an interesting moment. Because so many things, as I just go through the mundane of my life, or normal routine, made me step back and think. So I'm, again, just going to challenge you. Perhaps we need to just slow down, step back and think, is God looking at my heart? Do I need to move forward accordingly? So let's go to the next slide, see what it's got for us. I love this one. Encouragement from a good God. Can you read those verses for me, Arvin? Thank you. 9 through 15, I think we're at.
During that night, the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up, go down against the camp, because I am going to give it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah, and listen to what they are saying. Afterwards, you will be encouraged to attack the camp." So he and Purah his servant went down to the outposts of the camp. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the other eastern peoples had settled in the valley, thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand of the seashore. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. "I had a dream," he was saying. "A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed." His friend responded, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he worshipped God. He returned to the camp of Israel and called out, "Get up, the Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands."
Here's what I love about this. This fits right into what Mike was talking about. At least that's my take of what Mike was talking about. This shows the loving kindness of God when He brings encouragement to His people when they're in a position of weakness, and He still does that. He does it in a lot of different forms. Sometimes it's a dream like we just read about. Sometimes it may be an encouraging word from a friend. For me, a lot of times it is, for some reason I'll turn on a Christian radio station and it is the right song at the right moment with the right words that just fit the bill, right with where I'm at. So here's what I want you to write in paraphrased form. Hold on to the promises and encouragement that God does give you, in whatever form that takes, because it is from God. It's as tangible as experiencing the real thing. Let's go to the next slide. Here's kind of an interesting, the strange weapons of our warfare. Arvin, jump ahead for me again, 15 through 18.
Dividing the 300 men into 3 companies, he placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all of them, with torches inside. "Watch me," he told them. "Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp blow yours and shout, for the Lord and for Gideon."
Can you imagine the scene? I mean, seriously, sometimes we read the Bible and it's, but if you can, I mean, if I were a great storyteller, can you just imagine? I mean, here's these 300 guys, and I don't know how they distributed weapons back then, but, in my mind, I'm picturing this movie scene of, these guys, and they're already kind of freaked out about the numbers, and they show up and, and here's their leader, and, I'm thinking, of course, I'm in the Avengers sort of mindset, some sort of a lightsaber would have been really cool to, but what do you get an empty clay jar, you get a torch, and a trumpet. It's like, hello, what are we going to blow this thing off key? And, God, it's an amazing thing, because with God, everything is not as it seems. And that's what I was saying a minute ago. Sometimes the impossible is exactly the possible with God. And then our lives get turned down. And when you are weak, He will prove Himself strong. Let's see what the next slide says. Let's jump ahead, Steve. But we have this treasure within jars of clay. Arvin, you're on.
Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they had changed the guard. They blew their trumpets and broke the jars that were in their hands. The 3 companies blew the trumpets and smashed the jars. Grasping the torches in their left hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets they were to blow, they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." While each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled.
So what's going on? As the jars of clay are smashed, exposing the light of the torches, and the trumpets are frantically sounding on every side of the camp, confusion sets in. The Midians are going nuts. They start killing each other. I mean, it's a crazy scene. It's victory for Gideon and the Israelites. I mean, we all kind of assumed that's where the story was going, right? Great. All right, Brian, so what does that mean for me in 2012? Here's what I want you to know. Something I didn't know as many times as I'd heard this story, or maybe I just didn't take notes. Midian actually means strife. So here is what I, in my studies, have come to think. They stand for a picture of trouble, trials, stuff, crap that goes on while we're here on this earth. I can just say it. I could probably go a lot further with my bluntness, but I think you get the idea. So here's, again, a question that I think could be an interesting. Does God still use Midian today? And if so, what clay jars, torches, and trumpets do we use today to gain our victory? Well, let's just go to the next slide. Let's see what we got here. Here's the answer. You, me, we're the fragile jar. Jesus obviously is the light within that jar. And here's the deal. Your testimony to His greatness is the trumpet call you and I are asked to sound. Think about the story. They smashed the jars, lit the torches, but nothing really happened until the trumpet was sounded. And it was an interesting, again, one of the Bible studies that I was reading on this is that's where you and I are. Because you're the fragile jar, and we're going to break that, and we're going to talk about that. Jesus is obvious, the light, the gift that God has given each one of us to live inside of us. But you know what? We got to blast the trumpet. We got to blast God's horn. I don't want to do it. I'm not Mike Serig, but you know what? Because I can't. I have chosen, I'm not comfortable with walking up to some guy in a restaurant or at the gas station while he's... You know what? But there are other ways. There are other ways that I've been figuring out. How can my trumpet sound so that it's really God's trumpet sounding? So I'm hoping, don't wimp out just because we're not Mike Serig's, or we're not your pastor, or we're not who we put up on the pedestal that it's just their job. You know what? This is a 95-man trumpet section. It's not just a couple of guys. And we're going to be able to do it in different ways. And I pray that you're convicted of that fact really, if nothing else. So let's go to the next slide. Before I do that, kill that one once. Because here's kind of the whole thing with these jars. And here was actually backing up to about July, my thought process. So I'm buying into the fact, Brian, I'm thinking for you guys. I'm this fragile jar. I can see the word picture. I can see where that. So what happens when a clay jar gets jostled around? The contents get spilled out, typically. So that's exactly what God wants us to do. He wants His light to shine through us. God delights in using broken, flawed, cracked pots so that He and He alone is the one that receives the glory. That's why the pressure's off. That's the beauty of the whole thing. Because we don't have to be a stud evangelist. We can just be us, and it's going to be God shining through us in whatever broken, cracked, chipped up, crazy sort of a thing. So don't despair. If you're a cracked pot, cool. God's going to use you just like He's going to use me. But here's kind of a side note of where I went to. Sorry about the Mountain Dew. Those of you who know me, don't go too far without that. How many of us, and I'm going off script here, but I got a thought that I really wanted to try to share and show you a picture of. How many of us have Lord, break me, use me, something along those lines, mold me, shape me. We've sung it. It's everybody, and here's kind of the interesting thing. Sometimes, I'll use my sometimes, life just literally falls apart. Sometimes, my wife doesn't know I took all these. Sometimes, it seems like God is just, chiseling away. Oh, my duct tape didn't hold either. It seems like, He's working on me, and that's what we're praying for. But here's, you know what? And sometimes, guys, put on your safety glasses, because sometimes it just happens like that, doesn't it? Here's the thing I've come away. Here's my deal from out of all my study. I pray that prayer. God, break me, use me, break me, use me. I'm praying that all the time. But here's what I've come to realize about myself. I'm putting me back as best I can the way Brian Vande wants to be put back together. And here's the reality is, you know what? God broke me, and He's picking up the pieces. Am I willing to let the Holy Spirit work on me? Because it's a different pot that comes out. I find myself, I break, but I come back the same way I was. So was I really broken? Okay, God, break me, but I really like where I'm at, so I'm not so sure I want this. I'm comfortable with this, the way I was. That's what I've been wrestling with, gang. Some of that may resonate with some of you. As we pray to be broken, and I hope that is a part of your prayer, because God does use broken, chipped, beat up, smashed sometimes people, because He's the potter and we're the clay. I love that. There's an old story from China, and I'll try to make it somewhat brief. But it's about, and you have to kind of imagine this, it's about two pots. One who is perfectly made, nary a flaw. And then there is the other that's got some cracks and some issues. Well, this old woman in China every day runs this stick and goes down to the river and fills them up and brings them back to her home. Every day the one comes back perfectly full, the other is at best half full. Happens for a long period of time. Finally, in our fun little story, the cracked, broken pot says to the old lady, "I'm not worthy. Why don't you just get rid of me?" And the old lady just laughed at the pot and she said, "Let's go back and let's look at the path along the way where we've walked every day for months." She said, "Do you notice on your side that there are flowers, but on the other side there's nothing?" She said, "I knew that about you. I knew that exactly about you. And so I planted some flower seeds, knowing that every day you'd water them." Gang, that's us. God knows where we're at. He knows our imperfections. He knows our humanness. And He just loves the fact that He can use us to bring about His glory, to bring about the flowers of His kingdom. You know, let's read. Which verse did I have up there? And I'm going to kind of try to wrap us up here a little bit. This was the verse that kind of resonated with me. It's another one from Paul, a little farther down, 2 Corinthians 12, verses 9 and 10. "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties." You fill in the blank. "For when I am weak," I found the verse, "then I'm strong." So let's go to that last side, because I think this is how I want us to wrap up. You got one more for me? You know, I love sports. Been a major part of my life, still is. So when is the devil being beaten? It's not when we're feeling great, confident, or when things look like wonderful things are happening. No, the devil's being beaten. It's when we are feeling attacked and under the gun. When we feel weak and helpless, when we're not sure how to respond, when we don't know what we're going to do, and we come before the Lord and we plead with Him for strength to go on one more day and the grace to help us stand. That, my brothers, is when we're winning. That's when the kingdom of God is being spread more than ever. Cling on to that, guys. Be willing to be weak for the strength of the kingdom expanding. Isn't that an awesome thing? There's no pressure. God knows who we are. He made us. He knows every hair on your head, every hair on my head. He knows every imperfection. He knows what I struggle with. But He wants to use us. So I'm going to just ask that you spend some time. You can go with the questions that I provided. You can run any direction you want to go. I just want to give you lots of time to share and get to know each other, because we do have lots of new faces. So thanks a lot for listening, and we'll come back at the end and kind of wrap things up for us.